Lecture 2, Accessibility and Ethical Design. So today we're going to bring together these two concepts. They're two areas that shape not only how effective your design is, but also how respectful, how accurate, and how equitable your communication becomes. So we have our module learning objectives, and today we're going to be talking about identifying accessibility barriers in digital visuals and going into some more of the application of our principles. So first, what is accessible design? I know that this is a concept that you've heard in lots of different contexts. And I talked about it a little bit in lecture 1 as well. It's basically a user-centric approach. So it means it's really focused on the individuals who are experiencing it, taking in the design, whether it's a presentation or an infographic or an ad on Instagram. So it means that basically products will be tailored to be usable by everybody. So yes, people who have disabilities, but also just any other person. So some of the things to kind of take in mind is that you want to make sure that they are accessible to people with visual impairments, with dyslexia, with ADHD, other cognitive differences. And so you want to ensure that screen reader software can identify the different pieces. You want to be sure that you're not using really wild fonts or weird spacing on the page that makes somebody with dyslexia not be able to follow. Same for ADHD. I very much have ADHD, and if there's too much happening on a slide, I will completely disengage. And so you just want to make sure that you're considering this from the beginning so you don't get something and then have to go back and fix all of these mistakes, because you want to make sure that you're really being open and inclusive to your entire audience. And so this is really underpinned by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so you will see those referred to many times throughout this class, so it's good to get familiar with them now. They put out a huge range of recommendations for ensuring that content on the internet is accessible to everybody. And following these guidelines will make sure that you're able to kind of meet that continued goal of inclusion. They address accessibility of any content on the internet at all, and it's to make sure that that material is something that people can access on any type of device. So definitely a computer, but also tablets, also phones, screens that you see out in public, right? Like on campus, the info stations, anything that's on those needs to make sure that it's abiding by accessibility guidelines. And essentially, there might be a little bit of work in kind of getting used to them, understanding what they're intending. But once you are familiar with them, they make the experience better for everybody. And so there's 4 principles that I want to talk about today. And they are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable is information and user interface components are presentable to users in ways that they can perceive. And so that means that they can actually take in the information that's being presented. It can't be invisible to their senses. Operable, user interface components and navigation must be operable, meaning users must be able to actually use the interface. It can't require interaction that somebody can't perform. Has to be understandable. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. It means that the user must be able to actually, again, take in the information as well as the operation of the interface. It can't be beyond what they could possibly understand. So you have to kind of understand the context. And then robust. Content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of agents, so the users, and that includes assistive technologies. And basically, it means exactly that. It must be something that all these different pieces can interpret. So we have the humans, we have the screen readers, increasingly we have the AI, right? So we need to make things accessible for our AI, because if people are going to rely on putting information into the AI, we need to make sure that the AI can interpret it properly and not just create even more problems. So then we also have color and contrast. And so we talked about kind of white space before, but color is also valuable. It can, make things pretty, but it also can present meaning. And so light gray text on a white background, not a good idea. I don't have any diagnosed visual disabilities, but I increasingly, as I get older, cannot see things like that. So it's not something that, you're necessarily like legally paying attention to, but if you had a document like that, it wouldn't be accessible to me. And so I wouldn't be able to benefit from it or be persuaded by it. Red-green combinations are difficult with colorblind viewers. You've probably seen those different colorblind tests, and so red and green is what comes up the most through all of those. So you want to avoid that. But then alternatively, high contrast between the text and the background really increases the readability. It makes things much easier to perceive. We have lots of tools. I will be linking to a lot of different options for accessibility checks. And so you can use those to ensure that what you're using is accessible. This example I have here, color should enhance meaning, not create confusion. Here, the different colors maybe is emphasizing, not create confusion, but the actual color choice is probably not the best, right? The last one's getting a little light against this kind of gray background. We're reducing the visibility there when we're comparing it to like the black. So the first purple, maybe that one's okay. It's kind of getting worse as we go. So you can see that there's value to having the color there because it's hammering home that point, but the choices in execution maybe are not ideal. And then font choices really dramatically impact comprehension. So there are some best practices about the types of fonts you should be using. And so essentially basic, simple fonts. You can use pretty fonts, but you want to make sure they don't kind of go too far. And then this is something where context will matter too. The leeway that you have for less traditional fonts will be greater in some contexts than others. Body text, though, should always be probably around 24-point font. And so I put a couple different examples up here. 12-point font, honestly, I'm a foot and a half away from my computer right now. I cannot read that on my screen. 18-point, kind of starting to get there. 24, I can look at it and make sense of it. It's at 36 or 42 where it really starts to become clear for me. And so I am not your oldest audience member that you would be likely to have. And so eyesight tends to get worse as people get older. I'm not the most visually impaired. I have my contacts in right now, but so, understanding that I am not the bar and still I'm struggling with this. So you want to make sure that your font is big enough, not just for you, but for other people. So kind of try to put yourself in other people's shoes and imagine how big something should be. Especially if you're using a smaller font, more decorative fonts are going to be even harder to handle. So if you're presenting that font really easily, you're reducing the cognitive load for your audience, which means that they can focus more on the content, right? Clutter and simplicity. Clutter makes it difficult, right? I mean, it makes sense in all aspects of life. I don't know of a situation where clutter improves something. Maybe the fun of going through a thrift store, but beyond that, generally simplicity is better. So you want to, break things into smaller chunks. You want to use your bullet points, but not constantly. You don't want to always have a bullet point. That starts to get distracting, kind of just in the monotony of it, right? Limit your images. Images are great, but you don't always need one, and you don't need multiple. Maintain consistent spacing, again, to kind of be aware of that cognitive load. That helps to decrease the clutter and just make everything more simple, which enhances people's ability to take it in. Like I said, images are great, but you want to be really intentional when you're using them. So think about the content of the images. Sometimes like the funniest one or the first one that you find might have other meanings beyond it. So you have to kind of think about how this is going to land with your audience. There are a lot of images that are available publicly to use. And again, some of them are great. Others can cause offense when you're not even realizing it. So it's just when you're going to use the image, make sure that you've really kind of thought it through, thought about who your audience is, thought about where whatever you're making might be experienced, to make sure that you're not unintentionally causing any offense. And with those images, you also need to make sure that you're adding your alt text so that the screen reader can actually interpret it. Sometimes it's not even the screen reader. Something just doesn't load properly. And so we see the alt text instead of the actual image. And so if you're going to put it in there, it means that it has value, right? Because you're doing it intentionally. So the alt text should explain what is it that image is presenting. And so ensuring that you're doing this, thinking about that kind of bigger ethical picture, it lets you build that rapport with your audience, and they will then kind of go along on the journey with you. So our takeaways for this lecture: accessibility prioritizes creation of materials for everybody, not just certain groups. It's for everybody. There are a lot of great options that are really pretty that you might kind of be drawn to when you're creating your materials. Sometimes that's great, other times not so much. So think about things like the color, the font size, just how much is on the screen. And then if you're going to use images, make sure that it's being really intentional and not just because you think it's pretty.